invoked. I'm not a lawyer. So privileges were invoked. We have to have some discussion as to whether or not those are appropriate and would in effect shield him from having to answer our questions. And that's an ongoing conversation we'll have among an awful lot of lawyers.
Was there any useful information out of this?
Ma'am?
Was there any useful information from Bannon regarding this investigation?
He answered the 25 questions, and I'll leave it at that.
Were those yes or no questions?
I'd rather not say about those details.
Did you give a general range of what the questions were?
Well, they were questions from the previous interview that he did not answer.
Relating to the transition?
Say again?
Did they cover the transition?
They covered the whole from the election forward.
So will you seek to compel further testimony, just to be clear?
Again, depends on what our levers are to make that happen, and that conversation is ongoing.
Does that mean it's up to the chairman?
It's up to me and the Speaker and the House Equities and others. Devin is not involved in this at all.
How long when you say there are further steps, you're talking about moves by Congress, not just conversations with Bannon's lawyers.
Right.
And sorry, to clarify your question, the 25 questions he submitted were for post-election?
Yes. Yes.
So this is up to Paul Ryan in the end?
Say again?
It's up to Paul Ryan, whether...
Well, the Speaker has yes, but he will get advice from a lot of folks as well.
And does the committee have to hold a vote?
Say again?
Does the committee have to hold a vote to hold a vote?
Don't know the mechanics of that.
So, Mr. Conaway, you're going to speak to the Speaker about whether
There
or
are,
not the commission holds him in contempt.
well, no,
right?
what I'm going to speak to are the bunch of lawyers as to whether or not the executive privilege or the presidential transition communication privilege, whatever that might be, is appropriate and does in fact shield him from having to answer our questions. That has yet to be determined, and there'll be a lot of lawyers chewing on that between now and when those decisions are made.
Do you personally feel like he should be held in contempt?
I think he should answer our questions.
Was there communication with the White House, as far as you're aware?
The House counsel had communication with the White House. I'm not aware of what those were. We were not involved to a limited extent because I didn't want the committee negotiating with the White House over what Mr. Bannon might or might not answer. But our House counsel had those conversations.
How quickly until this next step happen?
Well, we're all leaving town, so it'll be when we get back, I suspect.
Did the White House invoke executive privilege today?
I got to be careful. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a CPA, so I got to be careful with that. But that was used to answer in answers to questions that were beyond the 25. Whether or not it's invoked or not, you guys, the lawyers would need to tell you that. But that privilege was used to not answer the other questions.
He explicitly said.
That phrase was used, and also the presidential communications privilege,
He
whatever
said,
that
I'm
means.
not authorized to answer that question.
That's right. That was the answer to all the other questions.
I mean, does it concern you in any way that the White House here is seeking to intervene and prevent a former employee from answering a committee's question?
So you need to ask White House what their thoughts are on that. We have questions that are yet to be answered. We'd like answers to those. We may or may not get answers to them, and the lawyers will be
But as
looking at it.
running this investigation, I mean, aren't you concerned with the White
I would like
House
to
and
get.
what the
I would
White House
like.
is doing?
I would like to get all the answers to our questions I could.
Did Mr. Bannon say that he had talked to Mueller?
I say again.
Did Mr. Bannon say or communicate at all that he had spoken with Mueller, and if he also used this with speaking?
I missed the first part of the interview. The only question he was, I can't answer that because I wasn't there the whole time. He may have talked about Mueller earlier before I got there.
Does the committee plan on speaking to Hope Hicks anytime soon?
We're going to interview everybody we need to interview.
There are no more witnesses scheduled according to Democrats in the committee. Is this the end of the investigation? Or
We're going to continue to interview all the folks we need to interview. You guys have been caught before on schedule issues, and so just to let you know, we're still interviewing people as part of the
Are you
investigation.
worried that Democrats might point to this and say we can't have a complete investigation without having gotten the answers?
We're going to continue to move forward. Same thing can be said about Michael Flynn. He invoked the Fifth, and we're not going to get to talk to him. So we'll interview everybody we can. We're not going to a court of law. We're trying to get answers to the questions. We don't have to have the same level of proof to convict somebody of something. We're going to get all the information that we can to be included in our report.
Were there any communications?
Say again?
What about on Corey Lewandowski at this point?
We're going to interview everybody we need to interview.
Do you want to subpoena Lewandowski? That's what Schiff has called for.
We're going to interview everybody we need to, and we'll use the levers of the House to make that happen.
Were there any communications with the White House during the interview today?
Not that I'm aware of. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
But you rolled through the whole thing.
Good afternoon. This morning, Steve Bannon returned to our committee, and we asked a whole host of questions about his time during the transition, during the administration, and after the administration. He refused to answer almost all of the questions and asserted that he had been instructed by the White House to invoke executive privilege on behalf of the president. The breadth of that claim of executive privilege is breathtaking and insupportable. And indeed, at times, it was laughable. Mr. Bannon not only refused to answer questions about meetings he had attended and conversations he had had during that entire period of time after the campaign, but it went so far to refuse to answer questions about conversations he had after he left the administration and with people who played no role in the administration, had never been in the administration. There is no plausible claim of privilege that could apply to those circumstances. What's more, the only questions he would answer were questions that had been scripted, literally scripted for him by the White House. A set of 25 questions that had been written out for him, to which the answer to each must be no. Whenever we sought to probe anything beyond the four corners of the specific wording of the question, he refused to answer. That's not how executive privilege works. And to give you an idea of the self-serving and misleading nature of the questions written by the White House, there were questions along the lines of, did you ever meet with X? And because the question had been written by the White House, the answer was invariably no. When we asked the question, did you talk with X? The answer was yes. When we asked what did they discuss, there was the invocation of privilege. So the purpose of the question was to mislead the committee as to whether any communications existed between Mr. Bannon and, in this case, another individual. And there was a refusal to answer any questions that would have brought out the full facts. That is not how privilege works. That's how stonewalling works. And we cannot take that kind of stonewalling for an answer. Obviously has deep implications for our investigation, but it also has deep implications for any investigation that the Congress may conduct in the future. So we also asked Mr. Bannon whether he had been instructed to invoke executive privilege before any other body, and he refused to answer. And it's my view that he is likely, to the degree there is even any privilege as to any small subset of the questions we had, that privilege has been waived. Waived by potentially testifying to those matters before another body, and waived by the partial and incomplete answers that he gave to the questions that we had for him today. So in terms of next steps, I think the next step for the Congress to take is to initiate contempt proceedings. We gave the witness the opportunity under our House rules to provide any basis he felt for why he should not be held in contempt. That is a requirement of the House rules that we give that opportunity to a witness. So we presented that opportunity, and Mr. Bannon did not avail himself of that opportunity. I think there's only one course that is open to us, and that is the course of seeking contempt. We cannot permit a situation where the White House is allowed to script self-serving and misleading questions and provide it to a witness and effectively coach his testimony in a very narrow and misleading way. So that's where we are, and I'd be happy to respond to a couple of questions.
What's the process going forward to initiate contempt?
Well, I think the committee will have to have a vote to hold him in contempt. It may be necessary to go to the full body, or it may be only a committee vote that's required to initiate litigation to compel his testimony.
Can you ask for that vote, or does it have to be the majority?
Well, you know, as I mentioned at the conclusion of our hearing, hats off to Steve Bannon. He's done the impossible. He's brought our committee together. There seems to be certainly broad agreement among majority and minority members that
his testimony and the breathtakingly broad invocation of privilege is insupportable. I think the majority is going to want to do conferring with their leadership about next steps. Certainly it will be our recommendation to our leadership that we initiate contempt proceedings. And I hope that we have a meeting on the minds. I expect that we likely will, judging from the comments that my colleagues in the majority have made publicly about the necessity of compelling answers to these questions. Had today turned out differently, then a different remedy may be in order, but because of the wholesale refusal by Mr. Bannon to answer any of these questions, it seems there's no other course left open to us.
There are several types of contempt. There's criminal contempt, there's civil contempt, there's inherent contempt. What's the pathway forward here, and which do you prefer?
Well, I think this is going to be the subject of discussions from this point forward, is what type of contempt proceedings do we pursue? What type of remedies do we ask for? Historically, when contempt proceedings have been initiated, it results in litigation and a settlement, in which case you get answers to the questions. I can only speculate because the attorney who represents Steve Bannon also represents White House counsel, that this is being done in concert as part of a coordinated strategy to stonewall this committee. It is concerning when you have, to me, counsel advising one witness based on instructions from another client. But that's a waivable conflict under some circumstances, and I'm not a good enough conflicts lawyer to know whether a conflict of this nature can be waived. But in this context, where you have the instructions coming from White House counsel as to what this witness can and cannot answer, to us that's problematic. But I think we're going to now have that conversation about what type of contempt. The White House must know that this position is completely insupportable and they will lose. I can only gather from that their goal is to draw this out as long as possible.
Mr. Schiff, what was the exact rationale that the White House gave for extending executive privilege to the transition period?
Well, they made an argument that in a written correspondence to the committee that because the transition is important and some of the same factors are implicated in terms of the president needing to have candid advice of others during the transition, that a privilege that has never been held to apply during the transition should be held to apply. Of course, that's not our view, but what they claimed went well beyond that. They have focused on the transition, but they not only refused to answer questions about the transition, they refused to answer questions about anything saw, witnessed, discussed while he was in the administration, and even after he left the administration. Now, they've never, at least in writing, even tried to make the argument that there's some privilege that applies after you leave an administration in conversations with people who've never been in the administration. That's absurd. But nonetheless, that's the position the White House is taking, and that's a position we're going to have to fight.
Last question. The contempt, and if you do get to the contempt stage, do you actually have faith that the U.S. Attorney will take this up, the courts will process it in time to affect your investigation?
Well, you know, this I think is part of the White House stratagem. It is one of stonewalling our investigation. They have apparently made the calculation that they can't fully stonewall the special counsel. They may or may not try to stonewall him vis-a-vis the president's testimony, but there's no indication that they're trying to stonewall him vis-a-vis witnesses. But they have decided they want to stop our committee, and my guess is they want to stop the Senate committee as well. And they hope to draw this out long enough. Now, I don't know why Mr. Bannon would choose to go along with the strategy, unless this is an effort to re-ingratiate himself with the White House. But from our point of view, we need to get answers to these questions, and I think contempt is the only road left open to us. Thank you.
Did you say any update on your
Yeah, could you, any
memo?
updates on the memo? Any update?